Daniel Ducker here, and today we're going to change things up a little. We're going to do a book review. I have here Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. It's from the early 90s. It's like a Hugo and a Nebula award-winning novel here. I think it's about 600 pages. It's kind of the most recent standalone novel that I've read, and I'm wearing red today. So I thought maybe I would review Red Mars. So I'm going to do spoilers in this review. So if you don't like spoilers, don't watch this at all. But I think it's important when you're talking from a literary perspective to know what the story is, because you can't analyze the execution of the story without knowing what that story actually is. And that means you need to know the end of the story and the climax of the story, because those are the most important parts of the story, especially the climax. Without the climax, you can't judge if you did a good job of building to that climax, unless you're just saying, oh, we did a good job of building the climax. Like, you can say that, that's cool. But if you want to analyze it, you need to know what it is that we're actually building to. So Red Mars is the story of the initial colonization of Mars. We have this spaceship, the Ares, which is sent from the Earth to Mars with 100 colonists who eventually become the original 100, the original Martians. So we follow their journey through space on this ship. And then they land and they start building and they start building and they start building. And they start surveying and exploring and surveying and exploring. And we start to get some infrastructure put down. They've got these domed cities, or actually tented cities. And then tensions begin to mount with the government of Earth. The Martians even build an orbital elevator. So this elevator that stretches up and up and up to one of the moons of Mars, where they have a space base established. So now you can just use the elevator to take goods from the surface to outer space, and really kicks off an economic boom and exporting goods. And as that happens, tensions mount with Earth. And eventually the Martians rebel, and they're brutally put down. And many of them are killed, including some point of view characters in the book are killed. It's third person limited with multiple point of view characters that Mr. Robinson takes us through in this story. So the rebels are defeated, they go into hiding. And that's kind of the end of this book. It's the first book of a trilogy. So that's our basic narrative structure, right? They arrive, they build, they rebel, and then they're shut down most brutally. And the three main characters, we have John Boone, Frank Chalmers, and Maria Tornatova, and I'm pronouncing her name wrong, I'm sure. And, excuse me, it's Maya Tornatova, which doesn't matter because the last name, I'm sure, is wrong. Because she's Russian. She's the leader of the Russian contingent. Frank Chalmers is the leader of the American contingent. And John Boone was the first man on Mars, and now he's going back to Mars to settle permanently. And he's the big celebrity hero. He's our Superman character. He's just this really good, good-hearted, virtuous, optimistic character. And usually those characters can be very flat when you write them. But Mr. Robinson, our author, is an amazing author. And John Boone is not flat. And you really get to see his mentality and the way he thinks and why he's so optimistic. And there's great depth there. Well, it develops that Frank Chalmers and Maya and John Boone get in this love triangle. She is almost like a bipolar character in that she vacillates between the two of them. And she vacillates between kind of a manic state and a very depressed state. Um, so she'll just go back and forth and back and forth. And I love him, and now I love him. And I'm really optimistic about Mars, and it's going to be wonderful. And then she's really depressed, and she's like, oh my gosh, I was wrong, this is terrible, and I don't love anyone, and they're just using me. So she's also a point of view character at points, especially on the trip from Earth to Mars on board the Ares. She's the point of view character. And she also, great depth in her character, and you really feel for her too, because she wants to control herself better, and she keeps trying and failing and trying and failing. And then Frank Chalmers is this very cynical, jaded, world-weary character. He's angry. He's the angriest man in the solar system. His dreams have been crushed, but he is trying to do good. He just doesn't believe that everything is achievable that John Boone wants to achieve. It's not practical. And he does really love Maya as well. And he's so jealous of John and seething. And John was the first man on Mars. Why wasn't it Frank? And Maya loves John. Why doesn't she love Frank? And, all the people look up to John. And why don't they look up to Frank? And John is so charming and charismatic, and everybody loves him. And why can't Frank be like that? Like, Frank is smart, and he thinks he's smarter than John. And he probably is. So if he's so smart, why can't he make people like him? And he's just this bitter, angry, raging, seething character, really well written. And you feel for Frank because he tries so hard and he just doesn't get where he wants to get in romance or in politics or in any sphere, ultimately. And so Frank is basically our villain. John is basically our hero, and Maya is kind of somewhere in between, this catalyst, that this element that's causing a chemical reaction between the other two that's more severe than it even would be otherwise. So Frank, the very first chapter, the prologue actually, is Frank murdering John Boone. All right, so spoilers, first chapter, he murders John Boone. And then we flash back, right? So right off the bat, our author is showing us this guy kills that guy, and this woman is a part of the issue there. So he starts almost with a climax. And then he flashes back. How did we get here? How did we get to this murder on Mars? How did we get to this bitter, angry, evil guy, Frank? If you just read the prologue, he seems evil as heck. And then we see through Maya. She is in love with John, and then she's in love with Frank, and then she's in love with John. And we see this develop as we see the politics come out in the story as well. And we start to get some sympathy for Frank. A little bit, not much, but you're like, okay, well, he's not all bad. And then we get to Mars. We have another point of view character, Nadia the Engineer. And she's building and surveying and building and surveying. And she has her own romance subplot. But she's a lot of exposition. This is what they do. This is what Mars is like. And Mr. Robinson, our author, is using hard science, very realistic, and showing you what a real colony on Mars might be doing through the eyes of Nadia. Right? And then we have a point of view from John. Because now we have a whole bunch of these small little tent cities on Mars. More people are arriving. And John is kind of like their spiritual leader almost. Their figurehead. Everybody likes John. They want to agree with them. He's trying to forge Mars into a nation state. And he's flying around and meeting with different people and flying around and meeting with different people. And we see from his point of view his optimism and welding all of these different people. You have Swiss and Arabs and Europeans and Americans and Russians, and how can we get them all to coexist and come together and form a Martian nation and separate from the Earth? Very optimistic. And you really get to, like, I just loved this character. I was like, man, what a good man, what a good person he is. And he's not stupid, and he's not cardboard, and he cares about Maya, but he knows she's a little crazy. And he respects Frank, but he knows Frank is very bitter, and he's always hoping for Frank to get over his bitterness. You know, John Boone wants to see the best in everyone. And then we go to Frank as a point of view character. And by this point, you already know quite a bit about Frank, but he just gets deeper and deeper, and you're like, oh man, he's not evil. Like in the first prologue, you think he's really evil, and then with Maya, you see his romantic, softer side, and then with John, you see the bitter ruthlessness, but you also see that he's working for the cause, and he acts like he doesn't believe in the cause, but he's helping the cause. And then as Frank, as a point of view character, you see that in so much more depth. And he's so bitter and angry, but he loves Maya with this desperate, obsessive love. And he wants to be John's friend, but he's always in John's shadow, and he just can't deal with it. And then John is leading them towards this war with Earth. And John doesn't think there will be a war. John is like, you know, we can do this peacefully and they'll understand and they'll accept us. Frank can't believe that. He's too bitter. He's too jaded. He's too cynical. And he eventually realizes the only way to stop this war from coming is to kill John. Because John's going to lead us to war. And he does. And he has some illusions that this is a necessary evil, but also, of course, he's doing it because he's angry and bitter and jealous of John, romantically, personally, professionally. So he does kill John for many reasons, but he has one pure, you know, in his mind, a pure motive, this pure reasoning that John has to die to save Mars. And then after John dies, Maya is so upset and so distraught that she's just leaning on Frank and pulls him away from his job of trying to keep Mars together and keep Earth pacified. Without Frank there, the war erupts. So he chooses Maya over Mars. And right when Mars needs him the most, so does Maya, and he abandons Mars for her because he loves her. And then the war erupts. And we see the war through the lens of Nadia the Engineer. So we come back to this character. And she's just trying to fix things. The Terrans are blowing up the tent cities. People are dying. And Nadia is going around just trying to fix it. Rescuing people from bunkers, rebuilding the tents, rebuilding infrastructure, water, food, heating. They need all these things that are being destroyed by the war. And ultimately, she and Frank and Maya have to flee to the South Pole. And there's a huge flood that's unleashed because at this point they've been working to terraform Mars for decades. And there's this icy, horrible flood they have to contend with as the Terrans are unleashing some aquifers. They're breaking dams and flooding the landscape so that they can flood some of the Martian cities and kill people. So they're fleeing, and there's this flood, and Frank ends up heroically sacrificing himself to save Nadia and Maya. And he dies in the flood. He's washed away by the icy water, leaving, you know, our female characters. Now both of the men have died, our major male characters. There's also a character, Arkady Bogdanov, who's a very, very fun character, and he's Nadia's love interest, and he gets killed too, in a bombing raid from Earth. So Maya and Nadia both lost their love interests, and Maya had two love interests, and she lost both of them. So they're heartbroken, they're politically defeated, and they go into hiding, and that's the end of the book. So, leading up to this tragic conclusion, we have to start with tragedy, which they did, the murder, and then in the middle, you have all this hope and optimism leading to the eventual downfall. So it's a classic story structure. The characters are so deep and so rich. The science is very plausible. Even today, 30 years after the book was written, it's still in the realm of possibility. I'd recommend this for anyone who likes to read novels. If you like romance, there's romance. If you like action, there's action. If you like intrigue, there's intrigue. If you like sci-fi, there's tons and tons and tons of science in this book. And you'll learn so much about Mars. Even me, and I gloss over some of those parts of the narrative, even I have learned about Mars reading this book and this series. So I would give this 5 out of 5 stars. It's one of the best books that I've ever read, I would say. Definitely deserves all the awards and accolades. So in the comments below, let me know, what do you think about Red Mars and Kim Stanley Robinson? Is Frank really the bad guy? Am I being too soft on Frank? Is John really the good guy? Or do I idolize John a little too much? I'd love to hear a lot of discourse about this novel. And with that, I will leave you until I see you again. It's David Daniel Ducker signing off.